The National Investor's motto is, you can get information anywhere, but here you get knowledge. And for well over 40 years now, Chris Temple has imparted that knowledge, an unparalleled, understandable, and useful take on the big picture of the markets and of our world. He has been out in front of what you see on the news every day on many themes. More, Chris has taken this macro knowledge and his unique analytical abilities to uncover unique investment opportunities. Often, he has guided his members to big winners in resources, biotech stocks, and more. His talents and connections often getting him into ground floor opportunities before they are discovered. Without further ado, here is Chris with today's topic.
Welcome back, folks. In this discussion today, I'm going to be joined in just a minute by Rupert Williams, who is the CEO of my newest precious metals-oriented recommendation to our national investor membership audience, and that is North Peak Resources. As you see here, North Peak is listed on the Toronto Venture Exchange under the symbol NPR. It does presently have an OTC symbol here in the US, BTLLF. That is not beyond a gray market listing at the moment, but they have already applied to get on the QB so that it's a lot easier for you to buy this if you're a U.S. investor in a U.S. brokerage account. Not that you can't do it otherwise, but this just makes it a whole lot easier. That will be operational in the very near future. And likewise, here you see their website, etc. Make sure that you visit the website, get on their email list and whatnot. This is an interesting story in a lot of respects. Some of you already recall that at the beginning of the year, I did a podcast on my recurring theme called This Is Still Not Your Father's Gold Market. A lot about the precious metals markets generally, focusing on gold, but also silver. A lot of do's and don'ts, very engaging, if I may be so immodest appearing as to say so. And one of the things I talk about in there is how you pick different companies. And of course, this comes down to how I pick different companies. And it usually ends up being an intersection of management, the asset, the ability to raise money. And important these days, you really want to have an outlier of a story. Even with, and I've said this numerous times this year, a lot of you have heard me say it numerous times, even with the gold price doing what it has done going back over a year now, we've seen a double in the gold price from its bottom in not too long a period of time. Big part of that just in 2025 and or since the election, if you want to go back and look at last fall's election here in the U.S. But that still has not given us, nor should it arguably, a rising tide lifts all boats kind of environment. In fact, I'm happy that it has not done that. And among the reasons I'm happy about that is that those people who are engaged, as far as retail and institutional investors alike, are focusing on the most legitimate and, if you will, the sexiest stories out there. And when it comes to exploration plays, you want to, again, have the good management, the good asset, a lot of potential blue sky slash upside, etc. And, another thing for me especially is that I cast a very wide net for information to distill into the knowledge that I try and pass on to you folks. And in the case of North Peak and how that story was really drummed into me by a few colleagues not that many months ago, and then again in recent weeks when I ran into a couple of them at a conference in New York. This kind of is what some of you remember the name Napoleon Hill. He was a motivational speaker and author, business consultant years ago. It's something he called the mastermind. And part of my mastermind are colleagues that I know and have trusted for years, if not decades, and we constantly are sharing ideas. And all of a sudden, I'm hearing the same name from a few of them, and that is North Peak. You need to check this out. It's in Nevada. They've got great, augmented management, et cetera. And so I did. And over a series of conversations, I very recently decided that this is something I want to give our audience at the National Investor. And now, of course, we're going to do this video and some other things along the way. Now, before I get any deeper, and especially on that subject, first off, you also see on the screen here now the notification from North Peak's own material that either Rupert or myself may be making what could be construed as forward-looking statements, especially when mineral exploration is concerned. It's a risky business. Not everybody succeeds. Even those who succeed, sometimes things don't come out as and when you think they will, and so be mindful of that. Secondly, though I recommended North Peak International Investor based on its merits, the company, as others do, has engaged National Investor Publishing to do some follow-on media work and copywriting and things like that, of which this video is a part. Now, one of the key aspects here where North Peak is concerned is the management team that is relatively new to the company. It's a story and a company with an asset, Prospect Mountain in Nevada, that has really over a period of time became somewhat stale. It was a large family-owned project, the Erickson family for years in Nevada, and now they've realized that with two very high-profile neighbors, one being I-80 Gold and the other one being McEwen Mining and a couple other neighbors that are not as high profile but relevant. They're kind of smack in the middle of a substantial trend in Nevada, which has got some past production, which has got, and this really blew me away when I started to learn this story, something like 11 miles of existing underground workings, which, I mean, hell, to replicate that today would cost you more than a company's market cap currently, I think. But it's already there. Some interesting anecdotes about the nature of that, too, that we'll get into along the way. But Rupert Williams, a new CEO who you're going to meet in a second, he's got some great chops, a very successful track record in raising money in this industry. And not only in raising money, but figuring out what to invest it in along the way. And I'm going to let him get into a little bit of his background when I bring him on. Second, and most recently being added as chairman just in recent weeks, is Harry Dobson, who, among other things, in his background was once upon a time the chairman of Kirkland Lake Gold, wildly successful company up in Canada. He was also a founding shareholder of Rupert Resources, which was also a widely successful story, not terribly long ago, as you see right here. And so between these two gentlemen, they have money raising ability. They've done this before. It's not their first rodeo. And of course, they're really big in hitting my favorite theme, as you know, that is bet on the jockey. When you're looking at companies, you want to find ones that have got jockeys, of course, I mean management, that have ridden successful races in the past and monetized assets in the past for their shareholders elsewhere. The project itself, as I got to understand it more, it reminded me of some years back when I recommended Tega Gold up in Saskatchewan, which was nowhere near as advanced an exploration project as this is. But likewise, the reason I liked it was in the sights eventually of SSR Mining, which bought our old beloved CB mine from the old Claude Resources back in 2016. As all of us believed at the time, they did indeed dramatically expand that camp, and that included bringing Tega Gold in, into their fold. And however it happens, none of us knows the answer to this yet. But however it happens, this Prospect Mountain asset, which is smack in the middle, and I'll put it up here again. Maybe I'll do it again when I've got Rupert on here. When you've got neighbors like this with projects like this, something's going to happen eventually. I'm quite confident of that. And here is Rupert Williams, the CEO and a director of North Peak Resources. Rupert, I'm glad you could join me.
Thank you very much, Chris. Good to be here.
Well, as I said before you came on, all of the key things you look for in an exploration play, you guys check all the boxes. I want to start with you. You're the CEO of the company, not for a very long period of time yet, but you're the CEO of the company. I'm going to get into the reasons why you particularly saw a great opportunity with Prospect Mountain and coming on as a CEO of North Peak. But before that, when I was looking at your resume, and as we've talked a couple of times now, I almost had to chuckle. You started an investment banking firm because that's your main forte. You're not a miner per se historically, but you're a guy that brings money into the industry. And you
That's
started
correct.
Ocean Equities back in 2003, and I remember a few years before that sitting down at the San Francisco Gold Conference that existed in those days with Frank Juster and a couple of his people and several other newsletter writers, a few other mining companies. And Frank in those days was hatching the plans, and a couple of them already coming to fruition for several really good companies that were born literally when the big bull market in commodities started, in 2002, three timeframe, and that's when you came in. So your timing was pretty darn good as well.
Yeah, we got quite lucky. Also managed to exit quite well. So yeah, timing. Uh,
Yeah.
got lucky on the timing.
Yeah, and that's always important too. So, tell us a little bit about what you did with Ocean Equities before we move on. The types of things you look for and opportunities you look for, and how that relates to getting into North Peak now as a CEO.
Yeah, my history goes back. I've always worked closely with a chap called Harry Dobson, and we'll talk more about him later. He's our chairman of the company, and around about 2002, he said, "Look, Rupert, you really should be getting into the mining industry. Why don't you set up a brokerage? I think we're going to have a big gold bull run." And I do listen to people who are a bit older than me with grey hair. They tend to know what's going on. That's what I set up with my partner Guy Wilkes, and we helped Harry fund the early stages of Kirkland Lake Gold. That was the first deal we did. I'd previously helped Harry raise some money in the Northwest Territories for the diamonds exploration that was going on up there. So I've known Harry for a long, long time. Um, and we were delighted to be involved with Kirkland Lake. Obviously, that was a great success story. And then we started to find that there was quite a demand to bring Canadian mining companies through London to fund them. These markets kind of all work in different parallels. Sometimes London's got money for mining, sometimes it's Canada, sometimes it's Australia, and it all kind of moves around like that. And we're in a period where we had several hedge funds who were looking to aggressively get involved in mining, so we could really help these companies out, fund them. So we had a fun time. Some of them we dual listed on the AIM market, and some of them we just did raised on their domestic markets. But it was good. It worked well, and yeah, we had a good few years there. And
That's
that's what we're hoping we've got this time round. It's been a long time since 2008. We've seen the gold price double here, and we haven't seen the juniors really move at all. Seen the big caps move a little bit, mid caps starting to, but the juniors just have, not moved. And if we see that situation again, we could see, many X's for the juniors.
Well, we all remember obviously that we had a big run from 2003 or so when you started Ocean Equities into 2007 or 8. Boom, everything got whacked for a while. But then especially the precious metals equities had another couple of three good years. But like you just said, I mean, gold peaked at 1900 plus US an ounce in 2011. Today it's 3300 plus, and yet the equities as a group are a third or so off their highs from when gold was a lot less back in 2011.
Yeah,
And not to
that's right.
mention, yeah, not to mention a lot of the smaller companies that are still kind of, scraping the floor. And there's a lot of people still, are out 70, 80% on what are, good companies that may one day make it. Um, but what's interesting to me right now, and I think hopeful for both of our sakes, as well as for investors who are watching, most of this recent rise in the gold price, as you also well know, has not come about because of retail investors and even much in the way of institutional investors. This has been almost all central bank buying for various
Yeah,
reasons in the recent past. There's been some pretty good physical demand for precious metals as well from the public, frankly. But all of that in between, that's usually the deal maker or the deal breaker, that those investment flows, they've only just started to come in, and it's only been in the last couple of quarters or so that you've seen at least a halfway decent net buying of even
mhm.
ETFs in the public markets.
Yeah. And that's what's so exciting for the
Yeah,
gold equities,
yeah.
because the sector is so small. It's probably less than the market cap of Apple. If you added all the gold companies together, there'd be less than the combined market cap of Apple. And so if you get a small flow of funds into the sector, it blows it off and you get this great
Doesn't
big
take
bubble. And
much.
that's why you get the 5, 10, 15, 20 X's, which we're looking for. We like a home run, eh?
Nothing wrong with that. Let's talk about Harry for a minute. You brought him on just the middle of May as the executive chairman of the company. And
Yeah.
he's got a very rich background in investment banking in the resource industry. Not only was he a founder and chairman of Kirkland Lake Gold, which Agnico Eagle took over, what, 3, 4 years ago, was it?
That's yeah, it might have been 6 years ago. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So
So very, very, very great exit, in that case. And then he was the founder and a chairman of Rupert Resources, which is a company I know a little bit about, but they're Finland focused, and they've fleshed out a very nice resource of what, 4 million ounces or thereabouts now,
three and a half million
3.5
ounces.
million
Yeah.
ounces of gold. Another great
Near
story.
surface. Yeah, near surface, good grade, very quick payback.
Yeah.
And it's sitting there with a market cap of 1.3 billion. And Agnico own 15% of that. Maybe they're going to take it out. Who knows? Somebody's going to come for it. 3.5 million ounces in a good jurisdiction. It's got to be interesting to one of the majors.
To
Those
somebody,
ounces
yes.
aren't easy to find these days.
That's for sure. Well, and even back before all of that, Harry was, correct me if I'm wrong, he was a principal or founder of Yorkton Securities, which is a very venerable Canadian firm that finances a lot
He
of this
he
stuff.
was. I believe it was Yorkton in the UK that he ran.
In the UK, I'm
He
sorry.
ran he ran it in the UK. And you mentioned a name with one of the guys he worked with, one of his early employees with Frank Juster.
Yeah,
There was Ron Brimacombe there.
yeah.
So they have a great history of funding mining projects. And I found, and someone told me very early on, a guy who used to be a fund manager at Dundee. He said, Rupert, he said, if you follow, these six people over the next 20 years, he said, you'll make a lot of money. And the names were Robert Friedland, the Lundin Group, Sprott, McEwen, Dobson, and Frank Juster. And I
Yeah.
think over the last 30 years, if you've invested with that group, you've probably done very, very well. Yes, look, this is a high risk industry. They're not going to get them all right. But actually, if you kept with them, you've done very, very well.
No
And
question.
Harry's history and his knowledge base is superb. He bought Kirkland Lake from Bob Buchan at Kinross for $5 million. It was five contiguous mines. One of them was the Lakeshore mine, which I believe Sir Harry Oakes owned, and he was one of I think he was the world's richest man in the 1920s. And the perception from Canada was that this Kirkland Lake camp was mined out, that the ground, particularly at Macassa, was dangerous, and there wasn't a lot to be found there. Now I've always believed, and I've always been told, the best place to look for gold is where it's been found before.
For sure.
So went back into that camp with modern mining techniques. Harry did, and had a look at it. We funded it out of Europe because the Canadians weren't interested. Because they had this kind of perception that it was Kinross wouldn't have let it go. They're not idiots. And he ended up selling it several years later for 14 billion. So that's a hell of a return. Of course, there was a lot of gold still there. His next move was to pick up Rupert Resources. He's turned that into a $1.3 billion company. And with North Peak, again, we saw there an old high-grade mining camp that hadn't had any modern exploration for the last 40 years because it had been in private family hands, in the hands of the Ericsons. We were very pleased to do a deal with them. We've been looking in Nevada. We think the US is a good place to be.
Yep.
A safe jurisdiction. This is a prolific area, of past production. So we were very pleased to pick up this asset sandwiched between kind of McEwen mining. McEwen's taken over a company called Timberline, so we have him to the south, and I-80 to the north. I-80 have two large discoveries on their property.
Yep.
They've maybe kind of got themselves into a little bit of a mess, taking on a bit too much and maybe a bit too much debt. But that's not to say that they haven't got two great deposits, and I'm sure they're
Oh,
going to
for
find their
sure.
way out of it with their new CEO, who seems to be doing a good job of kind
Well,
of
Rupert,
rebalancing everything.
as you and I visited about this recently, I followed I-80 fairly closely, and they have a few different astonishing deposits. One in particular is going to take a little bit of work, but they just try to do too much at the same time, and a little bit too quickly,
Yeah,
and the market wasn't quite ready for all of this, nor were they financially. So they've had, we don't need to belabor the story. They've had to do some backing and filling and regrouping, but there's no question in my mind, and I'm sure in yours, that there's going to be some very meaningful production in the years to come north of where you are. And focusing on Prospect Mountain, which your asset a little bit,
sure.
to the south of I-80, you've got McEwen and his project to the east, southeast, more or less.
Southeast, and we're
Southeast.
the mountain in between them. So
Yeah.
one side, other side, and we're kind of the mountain in between.
A theme that I talked about a little bit before you came on, but I really want to hit this because the Kirkland Lake story is perfect to replicate here with North Peak. This is something like you said. Everybody thought it was mined out. Who wants this asset? Kinross sold it. Why would they? A lot of people would like to have some of the assets back that Kinross and Barrick and Newmont and others sold over the years. They don't get them all right either. And sometimes they've got to
Sure.
focus on something so that they don't get in a position like I-80 got themselves into, trying to juggle too many things. But what I found remarkable, in this system that's got some past production, Prospect Mountain, is that you've got, and Ari Erickson was telling me this story too, when I visited with him before he introduced me to you. You've got 11 miles of good underground workings, 11 miles on this
Yep.
property
Of
where there's been
tunnels and
some
adits. Yeah.
tunnels and adits, and he commented to me, and I found this astonishing. This would never happen today. That the mining was so successful and so justified this kind of trouble years ago that you've got old redwood beams and posts that are a lot of this underground infrastructure, 8x8 redwoods. You can't even find them anymore. And probably if you could find them, you wouldn't be allowed to cut them to use underground, more than likely.
That's right, and they'll be there for another 100 years.
Yeah, well, long after we're all gone, they'll be there just in as good a shape as they are today. So tell us a little bit, kind of like a 30,000 foot version, Rupert, of what your knowledge is of the past production and what near term you think you can move forward as far as a few different possibilities to grow some new resources, etc.
Yeah, well, when we looked at this property, which we own 80% of, we have the right to go to 100%, which I think we'll be doing shortly. We looked at it and we thought, well, look, we need to find out what's here. So the first thing we did was we shot airborne geophysics, and it gave us a very, very large target underneath the water table. The old timers, and you talk about the historic workings, the 11 miles of infrastructure, they got down to the water table. Once they got to the water table, they couldn't deal with water back in the days then. So underneath the water table, we see a very, very large sulfide, anomaly, which we hoped was sulfides. It's about 2 kilometers in length by a kilometer in width, and it stuck out. And it was exactly what we see across at kind of I-80, similar size. So we drilled it. It was a complicated drill hole to get into it. It was 1,000 meters from the surface. We hit it right to the east, away from the contact zone, and we proved that it was sulfides and it was mineralized, which was great. We mainly got silver and zinc, but it was still $400 rock, which is would be profitable. However, as we move across the top of the mountain, soil sampling across the top of the mountain, we see that from the east to the west, it moves from silver and zinc to lead gold. So we hope when we get a second drill hole into this target nearer the contact zone in the west, we're going to see the lead and the gold there. But we certainly got a very, very large anomaly. Our geologist says, look, it's big enough to host 3 million ounces of gold. We're not saying we've got 3 million ounces of gold. It has the ability to host that. We've got to go and do the hard work and get into that and drill that up. But that's only one of the areas. That's probably where the big ounces sit. Across the top of the mountain, we did some drilling to confirm the old high grade, and we hit a drill hole up in the Rupert Williams area. It was 23 meters of 12 grams, and included in that was 3 meters of 86 grams. So the high grade stuff's there as well.
Very nice.
So we think that we've got three approaches to this. One is to look for open pits across the top. We think there could be 3 or 4 open pits across the top of the mountain. Carlin style mineralizations, all simple stuff that we understand, between 1 and 2 grams. And we think we could have 1 to 1.2 million ounces. I wouldn't say easy ounces because they're never easy ounces, but easier ounces across the top, open pitable. That's kind of what we're exploring at the moment. We've made a good start in the Williams Warbash area, and we hope to be able to put out a resource in the next kind of 6 months or so on that, maybe on a first pit. Then we have the oxides above the water, but underground, but above the water table. We've got about 800 meters of around the old workings where we're finding some fascinating grab samples. We got a grab sample the other day of 46 grams from the Dean Cave. So we know there's a lot of high grade stuff still down there. We're still in early days. We've only just scratching the surface of what we've got, but we want to put a plan around maybe some underground production, and then we've got the big target, 3 million ounces or so below the water table in this big anomaly. So we think we've got plenty to be cracking on with.
Sure sounds like it. And then for that deeper target, Rupert, down the road, you would obviously do what everybody else has done and what just was never done at Prospect Mountain because it sat dormant for so long. You would obviously dewater it, go down deeper to where you can drill from underground and somewhere down the road flesh that out, correct?
Well, what's great is we already have a tunnel that comes in. It's called the Silver Connell Portal.
Okay.
We can come in there. It sits about 200 meters above the anomaly, and then we can poke holes in from underground. We can drill from all year round because we're not affected by the weather underground. And rather than the trouble with drilling from surface is we're drilling down for a lot of voids. And it's hard to control the drill bit when you go into a void in some of the old workings or an old cave. If we're drilling from underground, we're drilling directly into it. It'll be much cheaper and much quicker. So that's the plan without having to dewater. Dewatering won't be a problem for us because this sits up in the mountain, so we've got the use of gravity to dewater this, which will be good.
But that's good. Thanks for clearing that for me because for some reason I had that in my pea brain here. But you already have the ability from this one tunnel to drill from a couple hundred meters underground, go straight down underneath the water to your target. You don't need to worry about it.
That's correct.
Okay.
And we see a different type of mineralization under the water table. It's sulfides and it's a CRD. But what's important to understand about that is that a CRD sulfide is not refractory. So it isn't the same as I-80, Scott. You're not going to need a roaster. This is a different process. CRD oxides, you need a roaster and is refractory. CRD sulfides, much easier process.
I'm glad you brought that up because part of the financial albatross around I-80s and that, and again, they're good projects, good people, great geology, but you got about $1 billion cost to be able to mine the part of their deposit that is refractory ore. And we won't get into all the crazy definitions of that for the listeners, but basically when you have something called refractory ore, which is half common in the state of Nevada,
absolutely, yeah.
It's an extra, very intensive and very expensive cost to eventually get the metals out of it, which you can still do. It's just more and it costs more money. So tell us a little bit, because we were talking about this the other day. about a recent drill hole that McEwen Mining had next door to you and why that's instructive to what part of your game plan is.
Yeah, McEwen took over a company called Timberline. I think
Right.
McEwen already had a 20% holding in it. They took it over, I would want to say about 9 months ago, but someone can look that up. They are drilling something right on our border called the Windfall deposit, and they got some nice holes that they announced around about PDAC time. They got 2.85 grams over 33 meters. They
Hmm.
got 6.9 grams over 10.7 meters. And then they got a nice long intersection of 1.6 grams over 48.8 meters. And that's right on our border. We think that we've got it kind of, it's faulted and it's shifted up onto our land. It was an area that Homestake was looking at.
Yeah.
Homestake got taken over by Newmont, and Newmont said, "Look, this is a little bit small for us. We'll move on. We've got other bigger fish to fry." But Homestake were definitely very interested in it. We want to get into that area. In fact, that's going to be the first area we're going to start drilling in August.
Okay.
We call it the water bore area. And that's easy for us to get our drill rigs there. We've got some nice flat land ground there. We've got some pads there, and so we're going to be drilling, and we're hoping to get similar or better results than McEwen saw in that area.
That sounds
But we
nice.
think that could be very interesting. And then we're going to move the rigs up to the top of the mountain. And I've mentioned the Williams Warbash area where this first open pit. We would like to, kind of flush that out a bit more. We know it's open in plenty of directions, so we're going to go and see, how much further it does run, and whether or not we can put a resource around that, which we're confident we can.
Neat. Well, I'll be looking forward to that some months down the road. For the meantime, it's important for folks to know that you're all cashed up for this. You've got enough in the bank. You're not raising money anytime soon to do all of these near-term plans.
That's correct. Yeah, we're sitting on $5 million at the moment. We raised about 5.4 million just after PDAC.
Right.
Good support from existing shareholders. Our top 9 shareholders own 70% of the stock, so it's very tightly held. We want to encourage long-term institutional shareholders into this story. So I have been to see some of the funds in Zurich recently who've expressed interest. They need their rock people to talk to our geologists, just to kind of, but they like the story.
Yeah.
But they're doing their due diligence, and these things don't always move quickly. But we'd very much like to have them on board. They have a time horizon of anywhere between 3 and 5 years of investing, so they're good, solid investors to have. And that's what we try and build is a very good kind of foundation of shareholders. And then we hope that the story is attractive enough to attract to bring in the retail base. With that in mind, we're a US story. We've got a US asset. So we at the moment we've just got a pink sheets quote, but we are upgrading that to a
Right.
full kind of QB, and that's in the process. Apparently, it's a couple of weeks away. You know what
Good.
that means, Chris? Normally means it's six weeks away, but we're getting there. So we should be
Well,
should be fully
you're dealing with
listed in
government
the US soon.
employees. Yeah, you're dealing with government employees or regulatory agency employees specifically, and it's getting into summer. So, but yeah, those things. And look, to their credit, and I was visiting with a guy who heads the OTC Markets Group when I was in New York back in May. They've been a lot, and I followed this, of course, for a long time, as I have to in my industry. They're banging these out pretty quick. And there's a nice umbilical cord that has been built between venture and especially even CSC listed companies in Canada
Mhm.
and helping them have a good path to get on the QB or the QX, which by and large you need to have these days in the US. I mean, I'm always trying to explain to US investors that, you can have an account with an interactive brokers, for example, in the US, and you can buy stuff directly off of Toronto or London or Australia or Timbuktu for that matter. But it does make things a lot easier and life a lot easier, and especially opening up to institutions in the U.S. once you get that listing. So that's good that you've got that in the in your sights for the near term. So you're looking basically after the summer's drilling program at a potential initial resource estimate, maybe early next year on the Mountaintop open pit.
Yeah, I think that'd be reasonable to assume that. Yeah, that's what we're trying to get. We'd like to, you know, put something together there on the first open pit. As I said, we think we could have 3 or 4 of these things running across the top of the mountain. But the really juicy stuff is in that big sulfide
Sure.
target, which is exactly the same as you're seeing just across the road. I-80. It's a very similar, kind of size and structure. Exactly the same fault system that's
Yep.
hosting it. I'm not going to get into that. I'm not a geologist, but our geologist will be able to tell you all about the Jackson Fault and why we're seeing this same deposit, and why we were quite so excited that when we drilled it, it was mineralized sulfide. So we know we've got something very much of interest there. We just don't know exactly what it is yet. We just need to get in there and drill it. And that is where the fireworks can happen.
Yep.
This is where you make the returns, is in the discovery of the stuff.
Right.
If you look at the Lassonde curve, it's in the discovery where you can make big money, and we think we've got something big there.
Well,
But
and this is
we
yeah, and
so
this
so
is
far, everything we've poked at this, every time we've looked at it, it's got better and better. So hence, we're keen to take our ownership from 80% to 100%, and
right.
that's a fairly simple. That's in our original agreement, and we're pleased. Everything we've tried at this property has worked. We like what we're seeing, and we think we've got a hell of an opportunity here. And Harry agreed to come on as chairman. I asked him personally whether he would. He's an old friend of mine, and he's a very large shareholder, of course.
Yeah.
And he grumbled a little bit because he's in his mid 70s now, and he doesn't need to be doing this. But he said, "Look, this is a hell of a project. Yeah, of
Yeah.
course I'll come on." And another one that he can put his name to, and hopefully it's going to be another big discovery. We will
Well,
see.
sounds like it, and I like that potential because these days, especially when we don't have this broad bull market for juniors, nor should we. And I don't want to see that. I want to see the good stories get the lion's share of the attention and the money. You're not a story that's got 100, or a million ounces. You're going to take it to 1.2 million. You're a story that can have a couple or three major relative, essentially new discoveries all in one spot and really make a big splash. And that's why guys with pedigrees like yours and Harry's are there with your expertise and your money, and bringing others in because this does have that kind of an outsized potential. And I'm excited as hell about it. That obviously that's why we wanted to do this. So
Yeah. Well, we,
anyway,
we think if we can find 3 million ounces, we got $1 billion company here,
yeah.
and that's our ambition and that's our goal. That's what we're after.
Well, and especially in Nevada, you can't be in a better zip code to
Yep.
have this kind of a geological opportunity than where you're
Yep.
located. I mean, it's
Yep.
hard,
It's
it's hard to beat
old
that.
high grade gold mine. The gold hasn't gone anywhere, and
Nope,
the old timers didn't get it all, and they couldn't
nope.
mine below the water table, and that's where we see the lion's share of it. And
That's
we've got some
yeah,
easier ounces across the top, as I keep saying. Yeah.
yeah. That's a tantalizing thing once you get deeper later on. It's a lot of different aspects to this. It's great. Well, Rupert, I appreciate the time, folks. Here again on the screen is the contact information for North Peak. Make sure you go to the website, kick the tires, get on their mailing list, follow them on social media, etc. And yours truly as well. Among other things, besides this video discussion with Rupert, we're going to have North Peak featured in some of our printed material over the summer as I'm dusting off my This Is Not Your Father's Gold Market theme to bring people up to speed on the do's and the don'ts, even at $3,300 gold, because there's a lot of each of those. And this story, believe me, is one of the do's that you want to focus on in this particular gold bull market. So, Rupert, thanks again. I'll look forward to when our paths will cross one of these days.
Excellent, Chris. I look forward to updating you. When we've got some news from drilling.
Sounds great. Take care.
For much more of the National Investor's cutting-edge content and actionable investment opportunities, make sure to subscribe to Chris's free content at nationalinvestor.com. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel too. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.